Welcome to Always Creating Values podcast. This is June 8th. This is our 10th episode since our starting the podcast back in September. And we've had nothing but wonderful guests. It's a real joy to do this program. I learned so much, and I get an opportunity to test out the things that I learn as well. Today we have Marty Cooper. Marty invented the first handheld cell phone, and we'll talk a little bit more about who he is. But let's talk a little bit about the podcast. The podcast is designed to focus on individuals who, as part of their career or their life, are consistently focused on what can they do next. In most cases, in a positive perspective, whether it's in their businesses or personal life. We've chosen always to look at people who've been very successful, so that we can help people understand that they too can be more successful if they pay more attention to what they can do, not what they can't do, and on a consistent basis. I'm Mark Fowler, and I'm the CEO of Stowe Management Corporation and the CEO of Revolutionary Conversations LLC. My business revolves around helping businesses go from where they are until where they need to be, or they want to be, or what they can be. And as that process works, it can be either a crisis situation or a growth situation. In most cases, our focus has always been on tapping into the potential of the individuals and the company and the team and what they've done and maybe what they've not done in order to help them go to another level of creativity on a consistent basis. And historically, it's been very, very, very successful because we're tapping into the positive aspects. It's not that we don't look at the what's wrong, but we need to focus on what's right and what we can do about it. And that's part of what we talk about today and the next month, and what the other episodes also talk about, which is what can we do? What can we do? What can we do about that? So I hope you join us. In next July, I think it's the 13th. We are going to have a panel with 3 individuals from the technology arena to talk about pretty much the same thing. How do we take what we've created and tie it to the human condition and to the future for a much more collaborative world. Our guest today is Marty Cooper. He's well known for having invented at Bell Labs, and he will talk about the fact that this was big team effort for him and his crew, and he has great stories about what it's like to be part of a team, to creating all kinds of new different kinds of technology. And I'm going to first ask Marty to talk a little bit about his career and how he's always consistently adding value to his process and to those around him. Marty.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a huge request you just made to talk about myself, because I hate to talk about myself. I like to talk about what goes on in the world and what other people are doing. But I am an engineer. More importantly, I'm an optimist. But my optimism is evidence-based because I believe and I have seen the evidence that the world is better off now than it has ever been before.
Hey, Agnes, could you bring me my cell phone?
Pardon? Including your cell phone. The people live longer, they're healthier, they're richer, and there's no reason to believe that the world can continue to get better and better. And that will only happen if we, all of us, contribute to that. There are lots of things going on that seem to be negative, that seem to be inhibiting its growth. I think we're going to surmount all these things, but they take a very positive attitude and a belief that things can get better and will get better. And another aspect of my view on life is objectivity. You cannot let emotion carry you away. You have to look at the evidence and look at life in real terms. A lot of people just do get carried away by their emotions. They decide what they want to believe and operate on that belief independent of whether it makes any sense or not. And that's destructive. And I've learned over the years that analyzing yourself and establishing goals for yourself that are realistic and are meaningful instead of emotional and just aspiration is really important.
Well,
So,
how has that helped? How has that helped you in your own development? I mean, you know, you were the leader on that team, and for the first handheld cell phone. How did that help you in that development? And a little bit about what that's like to be on the cutting edge and the excitement that goes along with developing something like that.
well, it's very exciting. You know, you could use your imagination and let your mind move freely into the future. I tell people that I know a lot about the future because I spend more time in the future than most other people do. Other people call that daydreaming. I call that using your imagination constructively. But I've been very fortunate. The luckiest thing that ever happened to me was joining Motorola, which I did. It was actually my second job after I left the Navy. My first job was working for the Bell system at a company called Teletype, which doesn't exist any longer. And it's a good example of people getting caught up in technology and forgetting the fact that technology is the application of science to create products and services that make people's lives better. So I hope you got the important part of that one. Is technology is nothing without the people part of it, and yet so much of my life is involved. I'm on a FCC committee. You know about the Federal Communications
Yes,
Committee,
we do.
manages all of the radio spectrum and communications in general in this country. They establish the rules and are the managers of that segment of our society. And there are so many people on this committee that are caught up in the technology, and to them, the technology is everything, and they don't even think about the people part. And that's just, and I could give you an example of that.
If you would, that'd be great.
People talk about 5G. All of you know about 5G?
We think we do.
Yeah, well, whatever you know, it's probably wrong, Mark.
I know.
You've got caught up in the emotions and in the sales pitch of the carriers because there are only two important things for people with regard to cell phones. First of all, can you make a call wherever you are? We call that coverage. And the second thing is, can you afford it? And those are the things that we have somehow lost sight of in this. With advanced technology that we have today, there are still many parts of this country that don't have coverage, where people can't talk at all. Could you imagine that? You know, you cannot get an education today without having a cell phone and service full-time. And yet half of our students do not have that for one reason or another. And the two reasons are they don't have coverage. You go into rural areas, and there are many rural areas that have no cell phone coverage at all. And there are many students throughout the country that just can't afford the service. When cellular started in this country, we had the lowest cost cellular service in the world. Now we have among the highest costs. And part of that is because the carriers have forgotten that the people are the ones that they are serving now. They see a future called the Internet of Things, where they are going to use wireless coverage to control all kinds of things in our life. They talk about driverless cars, and they talk about doctors doing operations using virtual reality. Well, I'm not going to have a doctor operate on me with virtual reality, I'll tell you that right now, but they've forgotten the fact that, that the important things, things like education, things like healthcare, those are things that have to be developed now, and people that don't have those services today aren't getting the benefit of the most advanced technologies. And so that's a battle that I am going through continuously now, trying to persuade my colleagues on the FCC Advisory Council that the Internet of Things is just fine. I believe in it, but should we finish the Internet of People first and then go on to the Internet of Things?
Well, you know, it was kind of interesting when, you know, Devin Blaine, your PR person, who was actually our first guest, suggested you, and we jumped at it, at the opportunity. And, you know, my business is all about people. You know, there's all the other kinds of technology. There's systems and corporate finance and all kinds of different things that go on in a business, manufacturing and whatever. But, you know, you got to pay attention to the people. And when I decided to do our pre-interview, I was so surprised that when we were going through it, that you were so focused on the needs of the human. I thought maybe, you know, you were very focused, like we see a lot of nowadays, people just focusing on the next bell and whistle that a piece of technology can do. From a creative perspective, you know, a lot of times, especially in manufacturing, people over-engineer something. You know, they just keep over-engineering it. And oftentimes, I mean, you see a lot of software that has so many things that nobody can do. I guess it's trying to, you know, reach out to a bigger market. But how do you relate to that over-engineering as it relates to today, and what creative things might we do to marginalize that a bit, or not marginalize it, but turn it into something more productive?
Well, the cell phone is a very good example of that, because one of the things that I have done from the beginning is, you know, I want to stay connected. And it's hard to stay connected if you're not part of a corporation, and I am not now, I'm independent. And so I have always had the latest cell phone, which you say, well, isn't that nice that I'm staying connected? Well, what has happened is that I never really catch up to what the latest technology is, because every time I get a new cell phone, I have to start to learn it all over again. People have forgotten this issue of technology. They talk about technology being intuitive. Technology should not be intuitive. It should be invisible. The technology ought to be there helping you, allowing you to do things more effectively than you would otherwise. And the best technology is not even noticeable. It's there helping you, but you don't have to think about it. The cell phone is just the opposite of that. They tell you, well, you know, the cell phone is an extension of you. Well, I happen to believe that. Well, they say the way you're going to make this thing an extension is that you're going to pick the apps that serve you most effectively. Oh, that's wonderful. Now you have to go and select among 2 million apps if you have an iPhone, or 2 or 3 million apps if you've got an Android phone, and decide which ones are right for you. And that's ridiculous. And so I have a vision of what the future cell phone would look like. And that cell phone is your cell phone. It's Mark Fowler's cell phone. It's an extension of your personality. And it's got an artificial intelligence built into it that is constantly analyzing your habits, your performance, the way you like to do things. And it will either find an app that serves you properly, or if it doesn't have one of in those 2 million apps, it will create one. But the whole purpose of this cell phone is to make your life better, not to be more complicated, not to provide you with all kinds of options. It is to make your life more effective and more comfortable. And so what I see the cell phone evolving to is as a personal instrument. Every person's cell phone will be different than any others. It's certainly not going to be as you mentioned to me early in our conversation today, this flat piece of plastic held up against a curved head in this uncomfortable position. It's going to be optimal in everything it does. And so my example of an optimal cell phone that whose purpose is talking to other people is a device that's perhaps an earring. Maybe it's actually embedded under your skin, and it's a powerful computer that you talk to and you say, give me Mark Fowler on the phone. And this computer is going to say to me, which Mark Fowler do you want? You want the guy that used to be the chairman of the FCC? Or you want this guy that's working on conversations? And I say, give me the conversation, Mark. And next thing you know, we're talking. And I have not had to think about technology in any sense at all. To me, that's the ultimate example.
So you're talking about a much more interactive as opposed to following their rules, you're following your rules.
You got it, you got it. These engineers make things and they say, oh, it's obvious. All you have to remember in order to do this, and then they got a list of things that you got to remember, and that's totally counterintuitive. You should not have to remember everything. You should do things in a natural way, the way you would do anything else. If you think of something and it can express it in words or in actions, this artificial intelligence will figure it out and make your life easier for you. And that's what technology ought to do. So this future cell phone is going to be distributed throughout your body. It's going to have sensors. It's going to be analyzing your metrics, things like your blood pressure and other aspects of your health, and actually interpreting those things and deciding whether you may be getting sick or not. And that is the future of medicine. Instead of waiting for you to get sick and then trying to cure you of that sickness, why not anticipate the sickness? Measure the things that are going on in your body, and when your sickness starts to happen, zap it and stop it. And there is the potential doing that of totally eliminating disease. To me, that's a people objective, not one of just having another gadget. That
Let me. This is very expansive, and it. What you're saying is very expansive, but it also ends up being multi-dimensional in the sense that you're talking about health, you're talking about maybe finance, you're talking about remembering all the things you have to remember. There's all different variables that fit into there. How would the cell phone business connect in that way? I mean, they've tried to do it through those apps, but how would they do it in a bigger way? They would have to connect with a variety of different other technologies or capabilities.
Well, of course, there's an awful lot of work that has to be done, Mark. And one example is for education. Our whole education system today, in most places, is backwards. The way people learn things is not being lectured to, it's by solving problems. Don't you agree with that? That the way you go out and learn is you're faced with a problem, you have to solve the problem. You have experience, so you've learned the tools that you need, and then you go out and solve these problems. Well, somebody has to create an environment where you can do that. you can't do this without being connected all the time. And that's why I have a conviction that the future of education is every student is going to be connected 24/7. And that doesn't mean that they're totally engrossed in their cell phone, but they are learning all the time. And anytime they want to get a piece of information, they can go to their cell phone. And when they go to school, they are being presented with problems that they have to solve. Somebody has to create this environment. And so there's an awful lot of work that has to be done. But of course, that's what we engineers are for, Mark. We have to anticipate what the needs of people and come up with solutions to those needs.
Well, let's flash back to Bell Labs. You know, like I mentioned, your concepts of today for the future are pretty expansive and more than cutting edge. Back then, did you have any idea this was on your plate for this? You know, did you have futuristic, almost science fiction like ideas about what you were creating and what it could be?
Of course. By the way, I was at Motorola. I think you were very much aware of that. My enemy at that time was in fact Bell Labs and the Bell system, because the Bell system then was a monopoly. Their principle was that they were going to decide what our future was and tell us what our future is going to be. And you being a marketing guy, paramount to everything else, you know that the way you do marketing is you find out what people need and what they want and respond to those needs. Not you are not the one that tells them what they need. But I'm getting off the track. Yes, we did have a vision of what the future was going to be. We knew that someday everybody would have a cell phone. The story that we told was that someday when you were born, you'd be assigned a phone number. If you didn't answer the phone, you died. And if you think about it, we're almost there now. There are more cell phones, more mobile phones in the world today than there are people. That's true in almost every country in the world. In fact, in the emerging countries, they hardly have any wired phones left anymore. And the amount of wired phones in this country is going down, down, down. So we knew that that was going to happen. Did we know that there was going to be a supercomputer in every phone? Not really. When we demonstrated the very first cell phone in New York in 1973, that there were no personal computers, there were no digital cameras, that the internet did not exist. So did we anticipate that all of those things would be embraced in this single little gadget you could hold your hand? Not a chance. But we did know that this was going to be pervasive, that everybody was going to have this thing, and that our lives were going to be changed, and changed for the better. And the reason we knew that at Motorola is that we were in the communications business. And we were making two-way radios for police departments and for businesses. And the only function of these things was to make the businesses and the police departments operate more efficiently. And so when the Bell system came along and said, well, the future of communications is going to be car phones. And we said, oh, we've gone way beyond that. The phone is an extension of the person. You only spend a few percent of your time in a car. The phone is going to be there making your life better all the time. And we had a battle with the Bell system that went on for 12 years, where they were promoting car phones. They never gave up on it, even when they first offered the service. Their first offering was car phones. Our mission in life was to come up with a device that was an extension of people's personalities. And the very first phone that we came up with was, in fact, a personal handheld phone. That was in 1983. It took 10 years from the demonstration of the first cell phone to when the first commercial phone occurred. And even then, at the beginning, most of the phones people bought were car phones.
Yeah, I had one. I liked it. It was right there.
Yeah, except that you weren't in your car all the time. And when you were not in your car, you had no communications. So those were really primitive days, weren't they, Mark?
Um, let's tap in a little bit about, we talked about your creativity, and you were talking about that in your young days you used to read a lot and used to have some more time on your hands than you might have. That this is where you were able to tap into that vision that you talk about. I'm looking forward, for other people to be thinking about how they begin at a young age to begin to appreciate their own creativity. Any thoughts for you about, anything you can share about how you found special time and how you used it? I know when I was sick as a kid quite a bit, and I ended up reading a lot, probably well ahead of what I should have, but it was very stimulating.
Well, Mark, it would be presumptuous of me to tell people how they should become creative or how they should conduct their lives. I know how it happened to me. My folks were serial entrepreneurs. They had a number of failures before they finally came up with a business that served them well for the rest of their lives. And so I spent a lot of time alone, and that's where I evolved what I believe was a vivid imagination. I think I mentioned that to you before, that the reason I know so much about the future is that I've spent so much time there. People say that's unrealistic. I don't think so. As long as you realize that you do live in a real world, and at times you have to come back and earn a living. But having an imagination is very important. But I have to tell you, Mark, that every person that is alive today is different than every other person that is alive. And not only that, every person alive today is different than any person that has ever lived and ever will for the foreseeable future. So how can you presume to tell any one individual how they should conduct their lives and how they should?
Well, I was just tapping into what you do that might stimulate something for them.
Well, you have to be optimistic, and I think you haven't figured that out by now. I'm the optimist of the world, and my wife can't stand that. My wife is a much better executive than I am, because if you think about it, if you're running a company, the one thing you do not want to have is a guy who is totally optimistic running that company. You want to have somebody that's anticipating all the bad things that can happen. Well, I'm not very good at that.
Hopefully all the good things too,
Yeah, well, that's right. You have to have a combination of aspiring to making your company grow and be better and to offer new services, but you also have to be aware that things can't go wrong and that you have to be responsive to that. I have been in roles of running companies before, and I would say that being an optimist has not served me very well in those roles. You have to have a balance between optimism and realism.
Well, one of the other things you said was, a real jewel, excuse me, a real jewel for me was the conversation about what are some of the qualities that individuals need to be creative, or you've experienced them in either yourself or others. And I think one of them was kind of the first one out of the box was humility. And I think that tied to the fact that we can't know it all. We can't be the ones that, the be all and end all. If you've got a project, you've got to embrace others.
Well, that's right. There is a balance there as well, Mark. first of all, arrogance does not serve anybody well at all. So you have to realize that there's no way any individual can know everything, but you do have to have confidence in yourself. You have to have confidence to know that when you run into a difficulty, and you always will run into difficulties, that you can learn how to overcome that difficulty, that there are tools, that there are ways of solving these things. So you have to have confidence in yourself, but there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. And I think humility is extraordinarily important. Of course, one thing I say is that I am humble. In fact, I'm more humble than anybody else. So, but I think humility is more an expression of a realistic view of what life is. There is nobody that knows everything. There's nobody that can solve every problem. You just have to realize that you are more capable than you've realized that you are. That you should not be afraid of taking on challenges. You should not be, and I must tell you, this is the most important thing that I ever learned when I joined Motorola. Let me start over again. One of the most important things that I ever learned was when I joined Motorola, the advice that we got from the founder of the company was, do not fear failure, reach out. And that company practiced that. I've had numerous failures when I was at Motorola, but they recognized that I had successes, that I had the ability to solve problems, and they tolerated my failures and allowed me to proceed and enough successes that I had a very successful career at Motorola. So this concept of humility, along with confidence, the balance between those two is crucial for somebody that wants to make a contribution to science, to life, to engineering, to whatever they're doing.
Yeah, and it's, you know, a lot of the world today is they're always looking for the answer as opposed to, like you said, trying to figure it out yourself. Figuring out, you know, one of the things that I find that it's kind of a double-edged sword that our friend James was talking about earlier before the meeting, was that there's the good and the bad. And one of the things that I think is good is that there's lots of information. On the other hand, a lot of that information could be half right, all right, not right. And we don't challenge it. We just assume that information, because it's in the book of internet, that it's correct and I can act upon it, as opposed to challenging it, and at the same time being humble enough to talk to somebody else or verify, do your due diligence about something, as opposed to just react.
You're 100% right, Mark. Education never ever stops. And of course, for me, that's the most exciting thing in their life. I learn stuff every day, but part of education is accepting the fact that you can be wrong, and the importance of being able to say, you know, I didn't know that. I thought that I was wrong, and I've learned something new. It's hard for people to do. You know, once you have spent a lot of time learning something, and then to have to unlearn it and learn something new, it's not an easy task, and yet it's very important in the educational process. If you want to keep,
you know, well, one of the more simple things we've learned during COVID was to be more like to have a Zoom meeting. You know, we were all very comfortable meeting with people in person, and now we don't meet with people that much. We do obviously meeting more, but it's a completely different protocol. You have to pick up things, nuances in the conversation that you didn't have to pick up when you were in a conversation, a real one, right there in front of each other. So we've had to course correct our learning, just how we deal with people. Now it's combination of Zoom and not Zoom.
That's a very important comment. A Zoom call is not the same as a person-to-person call.
Right.
And anybody that thinks that's the case is totally mistaken, which means you've got to start learning all over again.
Right.
And there's an interesting thing about learning. I'm sorry that I keep getting distracted, but
Okay, it's your day.
yeah, but it turns out that that learning is not a natural thing. You have to go out of your way to learn something. And if you decide that you know everything and you don't have to learn, and this is not something that I just made up. The scientists have actually done studies. If you stop learning, if you are satisfied with what you are and what you know, and you don't believe you have to learn things, you lose the ability to learn. If
Oh,
that
wow.
isn't the scariest thing that I can think of, that you could get into a situation where you know everything and you can't learn even if you want to. Oh, that is so scary to me. I just can't imagine it. And yet many people go through life doing that. They get to a stage of life where they think they are very satisfied with everything they've done. They go out and play golf. They can do their job, the same job that they've done before, without learning anything new. And they forget, they lose the ability to learn. And as I said before, that's the scariest thing I can imagine. And yet I think most of our people in our society do that.
Well, it's gotten easier and easier because we're told a lot about what we should do as opposed to what we could do.
Yeah.
But there were 6 other items, and I'm going to go through them. And I think humility, which is what was the first concept that came out of your brain and your mouth on our pre-interview. The other ones were, I'm just going to go through all 6 of them. Open-mindedness, likes to learn. You were just talking about the learning aspect. Enthusiasm, good sense of humor, and which goes along with humility, because if you don't have a good sense of humor when things go wrong, you're going to hurt yourself, badly. You like people. And then finally, the value of collaboration. And as I was going back through our transcript from our last meeting, you tied humility and the value of collaboration sort of together. But I see humility as falls into every one of those. In other words, it's kind of a base. You really can't be so open-minded unless you have a certain amount of humility. Okay, okay, this is what I need to learn. Okay, that kind of stuff. And
you can't laugh at yourself if you aren't humble, right?
That's right. You can't. And you do have to laugh at yourself. I would imagine. I know for me, oh God, I can't imagine how many times I've actually had to laugh at myself. And you probably too. You said that Motorola was very benevolent as it related to the things that didn't work, but you keep plugging away till it works. So of those, what would be? I would imagine the value of collaboration, and how do you tap into? A lot of people, and I would think the cell phone has some of the reason, because you can go to the cell phone to get some information as opposed to calling somebody that might have the nuances of a particular thing that they need to know. How do you help people tap into it? How do you help people tap into the collaborative need? Besides the fact that you're the lead collaborator, but sometimes people don't even know what collaboration is. So
you bet. Well, I ought to go back to what collaboration was in the old days. And I think about who was one of the most important collaborators in history. It was Albert Einstein. And when Albert Einstein had an idea, he would think about it a lot. He'd write it down, and then he'd send a letter to Niels Bohr or one of the other geniuses that he was talking to. And that letter would take a couple of weeks to go through the mail in Europe. And then the other guy would think about it for a while and send it back. So that was what collaboration was 100 years ago. And today, you and I can sit here and exchange ideas, and we do that virtually instantaneously. The future of collaboration is that we can be together solving a problem and actually working on the problem in real time. So if we're, just to pick a ridiculous example, if you and I are trying to design an automobile engine, we could actually be in virtual reality doing exactly what we're doing here, but taking this engine apart and putting it together with different parts and trying out new ideas. And all that could be happening instantaneously. So the idea that two people can create more than twice the productivity that a single person can, if you think about it, that's going to solve the biggest problem in the world today, which is poverty. Is there any reason why anybody should be poor when we have so much capability to produce? So the whole concept of virtual reality, augmented reality, I think the future of those technologies is in fact improving collaboration and eliminating the whole thought of not only poverty, but anybody having less than anybody else had. There is the possibility in a long-range future that money becomes valueless, that it's experience that's important, but anybody can have anything they want because we are so productive that we can offer that to everybody. So I think I give you an example of how an optimist thinks, Mark. But I'm serious about that. I believe that all of that can happen, and the tools for making that happen are all evident today. The virtual reality is just one of them, but collaboration is absolutely crucial, and you can't collaborate unless you have people collaborating. So as you keep telling me over and over again, it all comes back to the same thing about people working together and with the right attitude.
Yeah, well, the right attitude is, as opposed to, it's got to stay within the collaborative, I don't want to use the word entity, but dynamic or energy, when it starts to be, well, now I can run off and do this, as opposed to what can I do for the team? What can it's just part of the whole process, being making sure that you're adding value to not only the project, but to the team as well as yourself. But a lot of people, and you and I have both seen that people get together in a collaborative environment and all of a sudden they say, well, that's an idea I really need. And they want to run off and do it on their own, which, just diminishes the collaboration that was built.
Well, I have to tell you, Mark, you do stimulate great ideas. That the team that I had together was an extraordinary group, and it actually took over 20 people to create that very first cell phone. And every one of those engineers was smarter in their field than I was. They knew more about it. And if I wasn't humble enough to accept that, I could never put that team together. Yes, I had the dream, I had the vision, but I had to communicate that vision to all these guys. But without a whole bunch of people who were smarter than I was, the cell phone could never have happened in the first place.
Yeah, it's almost a rule of thumb for a leader to come to grips with the fact that they have to hire people that know more about something than they do. And that is one of the hardest things an entrepreneur deals with, is having taken care of everything and everything from washing the dishes to going out and marketing, that all of a sudden, in order to grow, they've got to reach out to, like you said, people who know more.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how Elon Musk exhibits humility, but somehow there must be there somewhere.
I shake my head, so it's outside my bandwidth.
Yeah, me too.
if, I know you don't want to give advice, but if I look at these 6, 7 characteristics that we talked about, which was starting with humility, like you said, you've got to be able to understand that there are others that know more than you do and that you're going to make mistakes. And you need to be in an environment that allows mistakes, which we also talked about, the open-mindedness, which also comes with humility. We talked about learning, which is a bit of a humble thing as well, because you're always reaching out. You're not satisfied, whatever. And you've told me, last time, and I think you said some of it today, that what keeps you going, what inspires you, is that you're learning one or more things every day that you add to your own personal equation. Then we talked about enthusiasm. You're obviously enthusiastic at your age, and do you mind if I tell people how old you are?
Yeah, but you can tell people how old I am.
I think you're 93, right?
Nobody will believe you.
No, you're too much fun. You have a good sense of humor, which we talked about. You like people and you value collaboration. And for me, this was a very special list because, we've interviewed lots of people in from different perspectives. And this bundle that you've presented to us is it is great, and it's all human. Every one of those aspects is human. There's not one bit of technology laying within this laundry list of 7 items, starting with humility.
Yeah, and they all relate to each other. And I would make sure that on the list is perseverance.
Okay.
You have to be able to accept failure, bounce back, and go ahead. And of course, that includes all the other things we talked about: self-confidence, the ability to learn, the optimism, the ability to look into the future. So everything is connected with everything else.
Well, I'd like to open it up to some questions. We've got 2 guests here besides Ann and James. Deepak emailed me and said that he was, as a board member, he had to go talk to his investors. And you mentioned to me, Deepak, that you met Marty sometime previously.
See you again, Deepak.
Yeah, nice seeing you too,
I
Marty.
didn't recognize you.
We've met many, many times in San Diego at the TIE function.
Of course.
Yeah.
So where did you guys get together?
In San Diego. So I started my semiconductor profession at LSI Logic back in the early 90s. And Marty was Rockstar, just trying to come together with CDMA, TDMA technology at that time. And we were the partner working with him. I'm talking about very, very early. I mean, precursor to Qualcomm. Do you remember that, Marty?
Yeah, of course I do. Of course, the only difference between Deepak and I is that he still has the black hair and he still looks young.
No.
I don't know how he did that. But
No, I was just a kid growing up at that time. And,
So this goes way back, huh?
Yeah, Marty is, as you know, he's a rock star, man. I mean, it completely changed the telecommunication industry. And so we were the geeks trying to get the silicon out. And so we were working with him as well and his team. And rest is history, as they call it. And we used to then periodically meet at the TIE function, right? Even though I'm still in Orange County. But I used to see him in San Diego quite a bit.
yeah, TIE is a group that gets together and promotes entrepreneurism. It started out being mostly Indians, East Indians. Now it is hopefully a very general group.
It is.
And they try to teach, among other things, youngsters how to become entrepreneurs. And of course, the only way to do that is to let them be entrepreneurs and practice it. So it's another example of the future of education, and not lectures, but actually practicing it, right? deep.
Yes,
Interactive.
absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have two young sons that are going through the same thing. We say, mom and dad will pay for your MBA, and they obviously over the years heard and seen us, and so they've decided to start their own business. The eldest one in biotech, the younger one in virtual reality, augmented reality.
Yeah. So Jerry, you're being very quiet. There must be something we've said that you don't agree with.
Who's that?
Jerry.
We got Jerry Ward.
Oh, Jerry Ward.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure we should let him talk. I mean,
Oh, okay.
he's a CPA and an economist, so he's dangerous, I think.
Nothing wrong.
I'm very dangerous. I'm a cranky economist. I love your presentation. I'm delighted to be able to listen to you. I share most of your values, and there's not much I can add to this other than to support it. I'm a firm believer in entrepreneurship and risk taking, and I'm come from the place that basically says you don't learn a whole lot from your successes. You learn them from your failures. So I'm delighted where you've taken this technology, and I don't want to create too much of a drama, but I've read some things about forward-looking people that have questioned the future of our society because of the lack of control of this technology. But that's too deep for us here, I think.
Yeah. Well, people have a tendency to think about the good old days. And the fact is that the good old days weren't all that good.
This is true.
And I am reading a book now called Fewer, Richer, Greener by an economist like you, Jerry, named Lawrence Siegel. And his thesis is that we are better off now in every respect, and that will continue to happen, that a population growth will slow down and actually go in the opposite direction, but that people will be richer in the future, and that we will figure out how to have a sustainable society in the future, and that things are getting better. Boy, I can't think of a book that expresses my optimism better than that, right?
Great.
Jerry, do you have a question for Marty?
No, I really don't. I'm just delighted to be able to hear his insights and see them. I'm a cranky tax accountant, and I really don't know how I can bring much to the table on this one, other than to say I really am delighted to have the opportunity to hear you speak.
Yeah.
What about James? All right, let's do Ann first, because James will have a laundry. He already had questions before we started this. Ann, how about you? You're
I'm going to be unmuted here. Hi, Marty. I am an early adapter. I love technology. I love everything about it. And I totally appreciate what you're saying. And I'm disappointed that the marriage rate has not improved in eons since navigation systems were put on cars and phones. And that all has to do with technology, because that had to be the biggest argument we ever had. This is where you were supposed to turn left. No, this is where you were supposed to turn left. And that is completely overcome. But what's interesting to me is I'm questioning whether we're getting smarter. And that's my question to you. Today, you took a hike in the real world. I boxed with my virtual headset before this call. That was my workout. So we each had an exercise in a different world, and I was doing it virtually. But when I was young, and you as well, we watched only 3 television stations. We all watched the same thing. We all had the same news. And now we have an abundance. And yet I don't feel as though people are learning anything. It appears that the way the knowledge is being dispensed is you're only getting more of what you think, instead of being able to be provoked to think. Remember that show, Point Counterpoint? That always amazed me, that I could hear the other point of view. With your optimism, can you help me understand how that can be improved?
Well, that's a very hard question, because it is very easy as I mentioned before, to be complacent, to take the easy road and just kind of follow where people are leading you and not learn. So you have to develop an attitude of being unhappy, of being aware of the fact of how dumb you are and want to learn things. But just think about it though, when you had those 3 stations, you didn't have much choice. So you had 2 out of 3. The few occasions my wife and I sit down and watch television, we have, the last time I looked at my smart TV, there were at least 10 different channels we look at, each of which has thousands of selections of what to do. Well, if you think it's easy to do that, you're a lot smarter than I am. So we are being challenged all the time if we allow ourselves to be challenged. And I must say that it's very easy to get into complacency and just float. One of the easy things you could do is just turn the TV on and watch whatever pops up. And there are people that do that. And they are living in a virtual world all the time. And I agree with you. They are not growing. They are moving backwards and are not learning. So I don't suggest that everybody is adapting to the modern world properly. I think our educational system is, at least the old part of it, is archaic. The system of giving lectures occurred a couple hundred years ago. It was started by whoever the head of Austria was, and his only purpose was to create soldiers who would follow orders so that he could maintain the security of his country. And somehow for 200 years, we've maintained the same thing. When I was a kid in Canada, we start out the day singing God Save the King, and which tells you how old I am, by the way. You know how old Queen Elizabeth is. And then we moved to the States, and things didn't change. We just sang the Pledge of Allegiance or God Bless America. Or, no, it wasn't. It was the Star Spangled Banner. So the educational system of giving people lectures is passe. Fortunately, there are a lot of schools now that are taking the high road. They are getting people to engage with each other. They are solving problems. They are challenging children. They are letting them learn by themselves all day long. Because if they run into a problem, they do what we do. Somebody uses a word that they don't know, you look it up. You can't do that unless you have full-time connection to the internet. So I don't know how I got off on this tangent, but I'm back to my optimism. It doesn't involve everybody, but it should. And part of that is our educational system, and part of the problem there is we got teachers unions, but we're not going to get into the politics at this moment. Change is important, and anything in our society that mitigates change, that keeps people in a rut, is bad, and change is painful, but very important. You don't grow your mind without going through those pains.
Well, one thing came to my mind, I don't know, about 15 minutes back, and we were talking about how do you tap into your creativity or force yourself to be looking at things. Buckminster Fuller was supposed to have said, I read it somewhere, every time he went to an airport or was coming in or he's going out, he'd go to the magazine rack, and he would always supposedly pick the top right-hand corner. It didn't matter what magazine it was, but he felt that he would read it from cover to cover. And that was one of the ways that stimulated him to come up with all kinds of different ideas in another topic. Because, you know, he might have been reading a magazine on nursing or medical, other medical, or engineering or automobiles. It didn't really matter to him. All that mattered to him was that he embraced something that was completely new to him, and it gave him the opportunity to practice and relate to the other things that he was doing.
That's amusing because among the publications that I read is The Economist, and it's very easy to start to pick up The Economist for a given week and just start going through every page. And of course, when you do that, you spend hours and hours, and it's always interesting, but you realize that you're not living in the real world when you do that. But I learned of all kinds of stuff that I would never be exposed to otherwise. So somehow, once again, you have to find a balance. And my solution to that problem is called the table of contents. I now look at the table of contents.
Pick and choose.
And I pick and choose, and I do that with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And I hope I'm still learning all the time, but not easy.
I don't want to leave this. We're 1 minute over, 2 minutes over, but I would like to give James at least 2 questions with you, because he'll hurt us later because he didn't get a chance to answer questions. So, James.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. Marty, honestly, I did have a whole bunch of questions, and it really got me thinking about how much the cell phone has impacted my life. And I don't want to sound like somebody who's going to start on a big story, but there was at least 5 ways in which I could see that this invention just totally changed the way I live. And but the fact is, I came in mainly obsessed with all the negative ways. And we had a very brief conversation before it started. I don't even think you were speaking directly to me, but it totally elevated my consciousness around this idea and took me from kind of having a negative outlook to a positive outlook. And so now I'm sort of blank on the whole issue, which I'm very grateful for, because I think I was falling into that comfortable cynicism, which allows you to not have to think anymore. And you've activated me to start thinking differently about it, which is going to improve the plasticity of my brain, I'm pretty sure.
Well, James, I have to tell you, first of all, people who are skeptics are very important in our culture. For every 100 ideas, maybe one of them is worth pursuing. Who is it going to shut down the other 99? So somebody's got to be a skeptic, and you should not change your attitude. But just think about the cell phone in the sense that we use it today, which is really the smartphone, is only 15 or 20 years old. That's half a generation. It's going to take generations to really understand how this tool should really be used and to evolve it, including adding artificial intelligence and all the things we talked about earlier. So we're just in the early days. And yes, there are going to be things we're doing wrong, things that are, how else are we going to improve if we don't make mistakes? So we got a long ways to go. And I don't suggest that the cell phone is by any means perfect today. In fact, far from it. I think we engineers have a lot to do to make the cell phone really useful and to solve all the problems of the world today. And boy, do we know how many problems we got, right? Talk about what's going on in the Ukraine, the poverty in places like India and Africa. India especially, I don't want to pick on you, Deepak, but here you got a country of super contrast, right? The most advanced technologies are being pursued in India, and the poorest people are living in India. Boy, talk about contrast that we ought to be working on. So thank God for the skeptics. Don't change, James.
That's kind of you, but I would like to close by saying that it really has created a paradigm shift, in our culture. And And that there's always reactions against it, any kind of paradigm shift. And usually they take a lot longer to have an impact than the cell phone. It really was, you know, I used to work in advertising, and I got to work with a GTE MobileNet account. And I remember, you know, having to learn about packet data and all that, you know, PDA and CDMA and all that stuff that was convergent technologies, trying to, you know, figure out who's the beta and who's the VHS. And, you know, it helped me feed my kids and make a living and do all kinds of things, you know, this device. And I was just a marketing person. But I do remember I got to get involved with the cell phone before everybody had one. There was a time when our marketing revolved around convincing people that this was a device you needed to have, which now would be ridiculous. You know, people want it way before. They're way out ahead of you as far as their desire for the device. But there was a time when people didn't know how bad they wanted this. And so it was a lot of fun. Getting involved in the early days. I think I had one of the first iPhones.
The first people who decided they needed cell phones were real estate people. And it's very easy to understand why, because a real estate person could only do two things. They could be showing a home to somebody, or they could be in their office when somebody called looking for a new home. And so the cell phone allowed them to do both at the same time, doubled their productivity. So they were the first people who really latched onto the cell phone as a tool. The ones who were the worst ones were lawyers, because they were, you know, I don't know if none of you are lawyers, right? So we could insult lawyers. But lawyers tend to be arrogant because they know everything about the law, and none of the rest of us do. The lawyers would say, we don't need cell phones. The cell phone will never be a popular device for society. So it took a while, but that is the most important thing cell phones do. They improve all of our productivities and our safety and lots of other things. So I don't have to sell that to this group. I could tell you're all nodding your head, except Jerry's not, because we know about accountants. They're all very numbers oriented, don't really have any imagination, right, Jerry?
That's absolutely true. We're very, very linear. Just point us in a direction till we hit a wall. That's pretty much it.
So all I did is prove that Jerry's got a great sense of humor and he's open-minded. So and humble on top of all those things.
What Jerry didn't tell you was that he's a fairly substantial part of his practice is business management, and the man had some really famous people. He's very humble about the fact that his client base is as so celebrity oriented. He's a genius in his own right. So,
well, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, Deepak, did you want to do a question?
No, I mean, at this point, you know, Marty, what gets you all excited about the world in general, not technology? There's a lot, but this world is.
I'm sorry, Deepak, you say what gets me?
Gets you excited about world-related issues, good or bad, but not technology specifically, but just.
You know, I have one great grandchild and two more on the way, and so I want you to know that family is a huge issue with me. And if you haven't figured out now, it's people in general. I really do believe that everybody that I meet has something to teach me. I don't have to like them all. But believe it or not, I tend to like almost everybody. You know, I'll have to make an exception for James, but you know, anybody that's got long hair like that can't be normal. Other than that, I really like all of you guys, and so it's very easy for me to be positive. Yeah,
Marty.
Yes, I got that, James. I can't do that as well as you
Yeah.
did. But, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that, passing values, your values, right, to 2 generations down, 3 generations down, will come easy based on your interaction with your family members? You see that happening?
Well, I just can't tell that because if you haven't figured out by now, I really don't like to give advice because I don't know if I'm better than other people. But one of my favorite things to do is to talk to children's classes. In fact, I just did that last week. I was invited to a high school and talked to a bunch of people, most of whom were Latinos in a high school here near San Diego. And it's a thrill to see these kids there who are listening and asking good questions. And I've only mentioned Latinos because somehow or other in their culture, they tend to be a little shy. So I talked for about an hour trying to get them stimulated. And finally, we ended up ending this thing. And they invited everybody to come up and talk to me personally. And 100% of these kids came dashing up, and everyone wanted to talk and they were all excited. That was more important than anything I said during that previous hour. So I really do enjoy, I love children and I enjoy interacting with them. And I have a few, what do you call somebody who is a follower? Anyway, I have a few youngsters that I work with on a continuing basis, and maybe they will learn something from me. But I have to tell you that they teach me more than I teach them. So, and by the way, that's true of this whole session. You guys are unaware of the fact that a lot of things that we talked about and the way I express myself were different than I have ever done before, because each of you stimulated that, and I'm grateful for that. And to you, Mark, for inviting me to come.
Well, thanks, Marty. Matter of fact, you are in the future, because that's one of the questions we always ask people at the end of these is that, was there something about the particular interaction that stimulated you or interested you or, whatever. And so you do live in the future. You had my question already set up. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.